First things first, this is the censored version of this video. There is an uncensored version on my Patreon if you want to have more of an understanding of what exactly happened. The reason that this video is uncensored is because I want it to get exposure. I want people to know about this case. And unfortunately, monetization is directly linked to exposure. That being said, while I'll be skipping over large chunks of what happened to Junko and changing a lot of the words and phrases, this video still may be disturbing for certain viewers. This is your content warning, and triggers are literally anything, because this case is possibly one of the worst I've ever researched. My last disclaimer is that I will be mispronouncing many different Japanese names and places, and I apologize. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old girl from Misato, Japan, the middle child having one older brother and one younger brother, and the 3 children living with their parents. Junko was known to be a hard worker, having a part-time job at a plastic molding factory to save money for after-graduation plans. She was described as a well-liked student, pleasantly regarded by her fellow classmates, who alongside staff observed her strong work ethic with her high grades and excellent attendance record. 8:30 on the 20th of November 1988 would become the start of a horrific series of events, so heinous in fact that some regard this case as a hoax due to the almost unbelievable sadistry Junko would endure. 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano and 16-year-old Shinji Minato were prowling the streets looking for a female target to rob and violate. The pair sighted Junko riding her bicycle home after finishing a shift. Shinji was instructed by Hiroshi to kick Junko off her bike so he could appear under the guise of witnessing the event and would be able to supposedly walk her home safely. Shinji obeyed, and Junko accepted Hiroshi's offer of a safe walk home. Unbeknownst to her, he was leading her to a warehouse. Upon arrival, Hiroshi told Junko of his Yakuza ties as a threat and proceeded to blank her. He then took her to a hotel room where she was blanked again. Hiroshi then threatened to yeet her. After Junko was blanked at the hotel, Hiroshi called Shinji and 2 other friends, 17-year-olds Joe Ogura and Yatashi Watanabe, bragging about what he had done to her. Allegedly, it was Yasushi's suggestion to keep Junko in captivity so they could allow other men to come and blank her. The 3 others waited for Hiroshi to bring Junko to a park at 3 a.m. After going through her bag, they discovered her home address in a notebook. They used this to threaten her, saying that if she tried to escape, they would use their Yakuza ties to find the inhabitants, her parents and brothers, and yeet them. They then took her to a house which was owned by Shinji's parents, and all 4 blanked her. On the 24th of November, her parents reported her disappearance to the police. In retaliation, the gang made Junko call her parents and tell them that she had run away, but she was safe. Whenever Shinji's parents were at the house, Junko was forced to act as if she was his girlfriend. This deception was later dropped when it became clear this was not the case. Shinji's parents and brother reportedly did not alert the police as they were aware of his mafia ties and feared for their own lives due to his increasingly violent behaviour. Junko would remain in the house for 44 days. As this is the censored version, I will not be going over specific details of what occurred, but I can give you a brief summary. The majority of the time, she was not permitted to wear any clothing whatsoever and was forced to dance and sing clothless in front of them to entertain them. She was also forced at times to sleep outside without any clothing on during freezing conditions. An estimated 100 men are thought to have blanked Junko over 500 times, with at one point her being blanked by 12 different men in one day. Sometimes, Junko was hung from the ceiling and used as a boxing bag. After only a week or so through her captivity, she lost the ability to breathe through her nose due to the acclimation of blood in her cavities. She would instantly regurgitate even small amounts of food and drink due to her damaged internal organs. She also lost control of her bowel movements due to having iron exercise balls dropped on her stomach. 20 days in, she could no longer walk. She could also no longer use her hands as they had smashed the bones in them with weights. After 30 days, she could not urinate properly as her internal organs were so damaged. Her brain was also even reduced in size and eardrums so damaged that it affected her hearing. Two opportunities presented themselves to the police that could have helped them recover Junko from her captivity during the 44 days. At one point, they even visited the house in which Junko was being kept, but Shinji's parents managed to convince them that nothing was going on and they walked away. If they had simply come in, gone upstairs and went into Shinji's bedroom, they would have found Junko. Another instance occurred when Junko was able to access a phone. Her kidnappers were tired from a day of drinking and were resting. She attempted to call the police but was caught and the phone call dropped. Tracing phone numbers and calls back then wasn't as efficient and easy as it is now. However, phone companies could still trace numbers, and if the police had bothered to look into the call that was dropped, they could have found Junko. As punishment for the attempted police call, Junko's feet were set on fire. January 4th, 1989, 2 weeks before Junko's 18th birthday, her ordeal came to an end. Bored, the gang challenged her to a game of mahjong, and even in her state, she won. They were enraged, and an event took place lasting 2 hours, in which afterwards Junko succumbed to her wounds. 24 hours after the incident, Shinji's brother informed him that Junko was gone. The group wrapped her in blankets, placed her in a 55-gallon drum and filled it with cement. Around 8 p.m, they discarded the drum in Koto, Tokyo. On the 23rd of January, Hiroshi and Joe were arrested for the blank of a 19-year-old they had kidnapped in December. On the 29th of March, Hiroshi believed that the police knew of his involvement with Junko's blank, and thinking Joe had already confessed, he informed the police as where to find Junko. The police were initially confused as they had been referring to the blank of a different girl and her 7-year-old son, whose case remains unsolved. On the 30th of March, Junko was found and ID'd via fingerprints. On the 1st of April, Joe was arrested for a different blank and was arrested again for her yeeting. Yasushi, Shinji and Shinji's brother were later arrested. DNA samples produced other accomplices in Junko's blank, including Tetsu Nakamura and Koichi Aihara, who were charged with blank. The gang were tried as juveniles but sentenced as adults, and they all pled guilty to bodily injury that resulted in blank rather than full-out yeeting. Hiroshi was sentenced to 17 years and upon appeal gained an extra 3 years and was denied for parole in 2004. January 2013, after his release, he was rearrested for fraud but released again without charge. Shinji was sentenced to 4 to 6 years and then resentenced again for 5 to 9 upon appeal. The parents and brother were not charged. Junko's parents, however, won a civil case as the yeeting occurred in their home. In 2018, Shinji was arrested again for the attempted yeeting of a 32-year-old man. Yasushi was sentenced originally for 3 to 4 years, but then resentenced again for 5 to 7. Joe was sentenced to 8 years and released in 1999. He's said to have boasted about what he did to Junko. In July 2004, he was arrested again for assault and was sentenced to 7 years. He is currently walking free. In a shocking twist, his mum actually vandalized Junko's grave, blaming her for the shortcoming son because of what he did to her. Her funeral took place on the 2nd of April 1989. Her future employer presented her with her would-be work uniform that was placed in her casket, and her principal awarded her with her diploma. Her mother has since suffered with severe mental breakdowns since the event. In cases like these, I want to remind you that Junko is the most important part. She is the one that needs to be remembered. She is the one that needs justice. The police had 2 separate opportunities they could have used to recover Junko, and she could still be alive today. She would have turned 50 on the 18th of January 2021. She did not. The justice system also failed Junko post-mortem, considering the extremely short sentences those criminals got for what they did to her. There is a petition that I will link down below aiming to get justice for Junko. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations for many serious crimes in Japan is 30 years, and it's been 32 years since this crime occurred. So what can we do? There are two things that I want you to do. First, I want you to remember Junko for the hard-working and bright girl that she was. She had everything going for her. She had a job, she had a future, she had plans, and she was never able to do those things because she fell prey to this group of evil people. This crime is very different to others that I have talked about or many people may think of. Some people may think of Bundy or Manson when referring to the severity of these crimes. The difference here is that those men, those people were incarcerated for life. And I think that is somewhat allowing people to romanticize the crimes. There is definitely a small but loud group of people online who fictionalize these people and somewhat are able to compartmentalize the severity of their crimes and the pain of the victims' friends and families because that person is removed from society. And I think lifelong incarceration may be one of the reasons people are able to do this. When Bundy and Manson were alive, you would never be able to see them in public or have them in general society, and therefore it gave certain free rein to these people to make things up. They could be the one to save them. But these men are free, and Shinji would also be walking the streets if it weren't for his 2018 arrest. I think this is the reason that the crime itself is what is sensationalized in media. There have been retellings of this that have been fictionalized somewhat and made to make bank, whereas a few others may have attempted to have authentic and real tellings of the crime. But the perpetrators themselves aren't actually seen in a good light. People don't want to save them or romanticize them because they are real threats. They are walking about. Of course, there is also the factor that this is a crime that happened in the East, and Western crimes tend to be the ones that are popularized here and talked about. And then there's the aspect of people simply not believing that this happened, that they thought it was a hoax. Maybe it's because they can't actually cope with the idea that humans are capable of this, or it's because the details are so vast, intense, and numerous, it seems impossible to people that all of this could have happened in 44 days. But it did, and these men did this. And so I will make an exception for this case, and I will say, as well as Junko, remember these men, because I don't want them to have a moment's peace. That's the second thing I want you to do. It is so unlikely that even in Japan you will walk past these people. But if not, just remember that these people exist, and they're out there, and they walked scot-free. They spent minimal time in prison, serving their sentences, and then were let out, and 3 of them reoffended and are dangerous people. I can only hope that these men never get a moment's peace, and that one day they will have a sliver of remorse, and I hope it eats them up inside.